Senator Walz, and he can start the roundup from his point of view.
Bob, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I want to be able to see hand in place.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here at my alma mater at MCC. How long do we have, Walter, for opening comments?
Brief.
I'll be very brief then. More interested in taking your questions, but a few things that I'm working on that I think are of interest to folks in Muscatine County. We've seen great progress on our EMS bill, designed to make EMS an essential service and be able to fully fund our ambulance services. The 411 bill, which impacts our police officers and our firefighters here in Muscatine, is making progress. So that's more of the policy side. And then on the funding side, the first half of the session is traditionally more policy heavy. The second half of the session is more appropriation heavy. So as we get into the dollars, my priorities are finding a steady funding source for mental health, making sure that our community colleges get a good investment in money, and thankfully we just got the K through 12 funding done on Wednesday, I believe. It was sent down to the governor's office. So those are my priorities. As looking forward to your questions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Lofgren. Last time I forgot to mention, I'm the chair of the Economic Development Budget Sub, and there's different movies that have been made in Iowa. Silo is one of the movies that I saw up there. That's where they had the kind of ag show going on. But Soup Cup Company was really involved with it, so it's really, really intense. So I hope that it'll probably be in Muscatine sometime. Again, it's called Silo. I might go through my committees real fast, just so there's probably some new people here. Again, I'm the chair of the Economic Development Budget Sub. I'm the vice chair of Oversight. And I should mention on the budget, because of the Invest in Iowa and the I Will part, which is a big part of our budget, we don't really have our targets yet. In fact, Mike Breitbach, who's our appropriation chair, is gone next week on something. So probably the following week we'll probably really be getting more into the budget. I'm on education, Veterans Affairs, local government appropriations, a lot of interim committees. I'm on IPERS, the Economic Development Authority, Citizens Retirement Plans with Gary over here, Investment Task Force, which this week on Tuesday, they have their Day on the Hill, and I'm actually going to speak at their one of their meetings and everything, talk about housing. And then I'm kind of an advisor on the Homes for Iowa prison housing program, where they're showing prisoners some skills, so they build houses and stream out of state. We ended up, the first house was delivered to, one went to Perry, one went to Jefferson, so that's happened over the last week now too, so that's real exciting. I would say, I'll just talk about a couple things. Child care is very important, and I hope we get something done there. I mean, I'm getting emails saying, where are we at with that? Because of all these different committees, sometimes it's hard to keep track of who's going to do what. So I'm watching that very, very closely. The companion animal bill, we'll probably be talking about that. That's something that Representative Kaufman cares deeply. But anyway, I'm sure we'll get into some of these issues that I care about.
Morning, Gary Carlson. Funding issue, Bobby touched on that. K-12 funding was a major issue this week. We also passed some legislation on solar. If any of you have specific questions on that, I'll be glad to deal with it. It was, in fact, Dan Clark grabbed me already this morning on that issue. If you remember last year, we had an issue on how solar generators, with their contribution to the total cost of the system versus what utility companies and other ratepayers. And while it was fairly contentious, landmark breakthrough on that and got legislation passed that everybody's agreed. So if somebody has a question about that, I'd be glad to detail it in more depth later today. And then broadband is also a major initiative, especially on the House side, but I would say equally supported on the Senate side. We passed a number of broadband bills this week, which go through my committee. There's still some more yet to be done on that. But it's really about the expansion of broadband to make sure that Iowans who are underserved or have no service for broadband, that we do everything we can to make sure that they do have access to that, because for people to, especially to be able to live in rural Iowa and to have jobs and to be able to communicate, that's a critical infrastructure infrastructure component, and we'll be doing significant work for there. Glad to detail that if others have questions on that. I'll turn it over to Zach.
Well, good morning, everybody. Senator Zach Walsh from Coralville, represent Johnson, Cedar, Muscatine counties, serve Senator Lochran on the Education Committee, as well as on the Agriculture Committee, Ways and Means, and Appropriations, and am the top Democrat on the Education Budget Committee, which is what's responsible for funding our community colleges, so it's always good to be here at MCC. In terms of what's moving forward, I think we've gotten a pretty good summary. I know one of the bill the Senate advanced this week was voting right restoration for felons with their sentence. I know there's some disagreement about some of the kind of strings that are attached to that, but whether that's moving forward and some other things that are moving forward. Hopefully, Senator Lochran mentioned childcare, which I agree is a very important subject. We've seen something like 32 bills filed this year that get to childcare in some way or another, so I share his optimism that we'll be able to get something passed. That's something that I hear about basically throughout my entire district, whether I'm in Johnson County, Cedar County, or Muscatine County, is the importance of making sure that we're providing affordable, quality childcare to young families. And then Representative Carlson just touched on the solar compromise that we saw. It's always good. The legislature likes it when people come to us with compromises. That was definitely the case here. Sons of the utilities and the solar folks got together, hammered out a compromise, and got something that everybody could agree to. Has the governor signed that yet? Or she will be soon? She'll be signing it soon, and we're hopeful that that'll pave a clear path for the development and deployment of solar in the future of our state. And hopefully that'll mean more jobs and more clean energy for every Iowan. So I'll turn it back over to Walter, and we'll go from there.
Okay, for those who are new here, basically we're going to go to questions. The questions, please limit your question to 1 minute. Don't make a statement, just ask a question. There's no follow-ups unless, of course, everyone gets a chance to, everyone who wants to gets a chance to ask a question, in which case, if there's time, I will recognize people for follow-ups and also for second questions. So.
Good morning. My name is Tommy Leanne Berger. I am a resident here in Muscatine, and this morning I'm here on behalf of the MCC Young Democrats. My question is in regard to Chloe's question from the last meeting, asking the state of Iowa for an adequate funding of community colleges. Are you able to provide us with an update at this time?
Well, Tommy, thanks for the question. Until we get the budget targets that Senator Lochran alluded to a moment ago, we won't have a clear sense yet of what the budget request is going to look like. I know that everybody up here is committed to fighting for strong funding for community colleges. It's something that I'm personally really committed to, something that I worked on really hard last year, and I'll certainly be fighting for that. I think that the community colleges requested an increase somewhere in the $12 million range, and the governor proposed somewhere closer to 7 or 8 million, 5.2. So there's a little bit of a disagreement, but there will still be an increase in funding. I would love to see the number closer to that 12 million number, but we'll obviously see what the budget targets look like when they come out in a few weeks.
Yes, Senator Walsh characterized the situation clearly. The first major budget bill that we do every year is K-12 funding, which we did finalize this year. And K-12 funding represents 48% of the entire state budget. So it really has to be done first, because that really determines what dollars then are available for all the rest of the state budget. So we are continuing to work on the budget targets by classification. So community colleges, regions, universities are still left in the education budget, and health and human services, Department of Natural Resources, all of those. The budgets this year, the conversations are complicated by the Invest in Iowa Act as to whether or not that's going to be incorporated this year into the discussions or not, because that has for an increase in sales tax, which would then, make some other dollars available, and how those dollars will be utilized. And there's a huge amount of conversation about mental health funding and making sure that we have adequate amount of mental health funding. So those issues, which are quasi-policy budget are still being debated and being discussed. I might be a little optimistic to think that we would get budget targets this week. I didn't realize Senator Braybaugh was going to be absent next week. It probably makes it the following week before we really get those done. We are about 2 weeks behind on budget targets compared to previous years. Doesn't mean that a lot of work hasn't been done. So all the budget subcommittees have had their meetings with the departments. The departments have presented their budgets. Other people have come to present ideas, thoughts. There's been updates. So there's a lot of budget work being done. It's just how does that formulate into the final numbers. So I would think that community colleges funding will be supported, certainly at the governor's level or perhaps higher. And I think it's also important to remember that there are other policy and appropriation programs that impact community college as well. So Future Ready Iowa grants, for instance, are exclusively aimed for people to continue their education in a 2-year degree or certification program. So those scholarship programs are really aimed for people to go to community colleges, which then obviously that's another way of funding community colleges. It's just not in their clear appropriation.
My wife Paul and I both graduated here, and Olivia also did, my daughter, and she's an administrator now in the school board office. And then my other 2 daughters took classes. So I mean, we understand what MCC is doing. We understand the value of MCC in community colleges. So I hope my son's sophomore, and I hope he's going to start taking some over here too. But I think this whole group has really advocated well for community colleges, and we will continue to do that.
First of all, thank you for coming and asking a question. I have fond memories of back in my day at the community college here when I would work with the college Democrats chair. I was a college Republicans chair. We would do joint recruiting drives, and we would be friends, and we'd talk, and we'd work together. So I appreciate you being here. Everybody up here is pushing for an increase in community college funding, and I think you're going to see a strong state increase, but as they all said, we're not quite there to the appropriations process where I can give you details, but I can guarantee you a robust increase, and I'll be fighting for as much as possible.
Next is approach. My name is Shelley Cervidio Elias. I am standing under the law as a medical card patient. I'm a disabled veteran. My chronic pain working that card under the law. These are products that I use medicinally from Illinois dispensary because the products from the Iowa dispensary do not treat my pain. I microdose. That's 5 milligrams, 5 to 5, 1 to 1, 2.5 milligrams CBD. These are tiny, tiny doses. But I will tell you, 4.5 milligrams in 90 days is a death dose. 25 milligrams in 90 days. Bioavailability, first pass through the liver. You lose 80% of your dose. That leaves you with 55, oh, let me put my glasses on because I am 49 years old. Hold on. Okay, 55.4 milligrams. That's 277 milligrams a day. That divides by 3, 55.4 milligrams. Do your 8% loss dose. 18.5 milligrams. That's 3 times a day. From the Iowa dispensary, that's your 1 to 20. That's 1 pill 3 times a day. That's all your patients would be allowed. That's it. That's a death dose. That's your 25 grams in 90 days. You're going to put your patients back on opioids. You're going to put them back into the opioid epidemic. You're going to kill your business at your dispensaries. And you're going to drive your patients right back over to quarters. It's a death dose. Don't do it. Please don't do it. Thank you.
Shelley, I support a vast expansion of our medical cannabis law, so I'll be pushing for that hard.
First cannabis bill we did before, everybody knew it wasn't good. That was, what, 5 years ago or whatever. And I wish Tom Green was here because this is something he is very passionate about. And this is like his biggest focus up there. So I'm sure at our last forum, he'll be here to update us.
Well, gee, I believe in the process we established, okay, which was to establish a medical board of professionals that get together to look at the research and the studies and the formularies and make their recommendations to the legislature as to what diseases should be considered and what dosage can be considered. There are very few, if any, medical doctors today serving in the legislature.
I am a cannabis nurse. I have more training than those doctors that sit on that board. I've been to that board, I've presented to that board, and they are not listening, sir.
Well, Shelley, that's your opinion, and you're welcome to that. There are many other medical professionals that are also not only serving on those boards, but are presenting to those boards.
Do not be pedantic with me, sir.
This isn't a debate, Shelley.
Shelley, we're going to have to cut that right now because we're not going to allow to have arguments going back and forth. You asked the question, he's giving his answer, and there are people waiting in line behind you who want to have time to ask their questions. So please let your Representative Carlson and Senator Walls make their comments, and we'll get on to the next person.
So
I want the science.
the board is making their recommendations. We have made changes in the law as the board has made their recommendation. And candidly, I believe that is a sound way for us to continue to operate.
So I know we had a piece of legislation the legislature passed last year pretty much unanimously that the governor vetoed after some feedback she got from her board.
Mr. Garrett in her office, sir. Yes, sir.
And I think that the legislature should pass that again. We had enough support that we could override the governor's. My position is that, and I think it sounds like it's shared up here, is that our current law is not strong enough. It needs to be expanded, and that we certainly would not want people feeling like they don't have access to something that we know works, and instead turning to something like opioids that can be really addictive and creating a lot of other challenges that are not intended. So I think that's where we are, and I would hope that we'd see an expansion come up before the legislature adjourns here in April.
I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Don Paulson. I live in 76 Township. Could you provide an update on the plan to privatize the management of the University of Iowa's utility system with a 50-year lease for like $1 billion? Who is the company? Do they know what they're doing? And would taxpayers be on the hook for any downturn in the economy?
Great question, Don. For those of you who might not be totally up to speed, about a year and a half ago, the Board of Regents instructed the University of Iowa to start looking for new methods of quote-unquote unlocking value from various assets that they have on campus. One of the things that they identified at the University of Iowa is that they have this power plant they use to generate both electricity and steam that they use to power the campus and then to heat it and to cool it. How they managed to both heat and cool the campus using steam is a little above my pay grade, but they managed to make it work. They stumbled upon this public-private partnership, or P3 is how they've talked about it in the media. They went and they basically they're taking this power plant that the university has. They're going to allow a third-party private operator to essentially enter into this 50-year lease. So they won't own it, but they'll basically own the opportunity to operate it and to gather revenue from it with the university. My understanding is that the contract has been signed. It was signed and it was voted on at a Board of Regents meeting about a month and a half ago, and it sounds like it's moving forward. I haven't had the chance to review the final contract. My understanding is the legislature will not get an opportunity to weigh in on this, which I'm not thrilled about. I've been very publicly skeptical. I'm not saying that this is necessarily something that will for sure blow up in our faces, but I think that there is some real liability if the economy takes a turn for the worse. There are potentially going to be unforeseen consequences. It's also possible that it could turn out very well. I mean, there's a possibility that is also real that at the end of this we get a very nice endowment, the power plant comes back, and things will be fine. But 50 years is a long time. It's like a really long time, you know. So I've certainly got some questions about it, and I don't
I'm aware of the program. Senator Wall's portions of it, he said it were correct. The contract has been signed. I think the university looks at it and said, what is our main mission? I don't think their main mission is to run a generating plant, okay? And the university's generating plant never provided all of the electricity that the university needed. They always were also a buyer of electricity from a investor-owned utility. So what this does is really says, okay, we're going to bring in outside professionals that manage utility plants, power plants, that generate power and steam. Generally, steam is an outgrowth of the power generation from the boilers. And we will have them run it. We will not have to have the responsibility for keeping up with the technology of that. They will do that. It is a long lease. Part of that long lease is a financing mechanism to be able to draw the investors in for that utility company to be able to do that. It's not the first university in the United States to do this. It was modeled after what Ohio State University has done as well. And there are other schools that are looking at monetizing these types of assets. Zach's right. The university hasn't given up its ownership. It's giving up its operation. The agreement calls for the new vendor to hire the people at comparable wages and benefits. I saw that 6 out of 7 employees have already accepted the employment with the new operator, and the university said anyone who chose not to, that they would find them another job within the university system. So it's not a loss of employment. The goal is to have those dollars go into an endowment fund, and those endowment fund dollars would be invested for the university to be able to use against some of their operating expenses and also to fund research. Looks to me like it's a fairly sound. I had a chance to meet with university officials, as did most legislators over the year. They provided us presentations. I had a chance to be on a telephone call a couple of times with them, both because of my background information in utilities and I can read balance sheet. I think it's a sound strategy by the University of Iowa, and actually is consistent with what we have charged the regions to do, is to look at other ways that they can continue to fund education and keep education strong in the state of Iowa, especially at the regional level.
I've seen some of the information on it. Now, I do know the utility board does not have to approve anything, because I happened to run to one of the members and visited with them a little bit about it. So, you know, like I said, it's really something the regions has control over.
Yeah, I think, Don, I think a lot of what Gary said is really important. The university's mission isn't to run utilities, it's to educate kids. And I think this, in the long run, will be a net positive for university students. They'll be able to fund scholarships, they'll be able to fund research. It isn't new. Ohio State's been modeling it successfully, and I'm really happy that it was required that they treat their workers fair, and I think that's been successful so far. I believe I'm sufficiently happy with how they're going to invest those dollars, very conservatively, similar to some of the markets that IPERS is invested in, which is working very successfully. So I think they've been fairly transparent. There've been over 50 public meetings. They've made themselves accessible to the legislature. So I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll be a net positive thing going forward. Good question, though.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Clark. I want to go back to the solar bill compromise. Senator Walz said the legislature likes compromise. I'm here to say voters do too. We have enough controversy and we're far enough apart on issues that often split partisan, sometimes urban and rural. But this one seems like a real win. I've read it described as win-win. You ended the session last year, I guess, far apart, controversial, Gary said, and there was work done in the interim. I've read that all the whoever the key stakeholders anyway were, got involved, everybody got heard, and everybody came out with a deal that gave stability or consistency or good things going forward. I haven't seen anything negative about it, and I saw unanimous votes, and that's a rare deal on something controversial. So I think my question is, especially for Gary, who was in the middle of it, but maybe others, is this thing a model, or is it one-off? Are there lessons we can learn about how to solve more problems?
I'll leave the bill description up to Gary. He knows a lot more about it. But I just want to, I repeat this at every forum, so I'm glad you gave me the opportunity because I didn't use it in my opening comments. We compromise far, far, far more than we don't. The problem is that when we fight a few times, that's what ends up making the news. 218 bills got signed into law last year. 91% of them had bipartisan support. In my state government committee, we've had 33 bills passed this year. 31 of them had strong bipartisan support. So we actually agree far more than we disagree. And this, I think, is another shining example of it. And I'll leave it up to Gary to give the details.
Sometimes the system's kind of frustrating. I have one bill that's had Ways and Means for over a year. Finally, they had a subcommittee on it. So, I mean, sometimes you gotta kind of hang in there, but it is nice that they work through session and get that all resolved. And I appreciate Gary's work on this too.
Somehow I became the solar guy. So, just some background for those of you who weren't here in previous meeting. Last year we had legislation dealing with those people who use solar as a way of generating electricity and what should be their reimbursement rate for the solar that they generate and then sell that electricity that they don't use themselves and they sell back onto the grid, and likewise what should be the rate that they pay when they buy electricity, because they are generators. But in the electricity industry, there are really three parts of it. There's generation, if you think about it, like Muskegon Power and Water has generating plants in south of here. There's transmission lines to move the high voltage electricity from wherever it's generated to the grid, and then there's distribution, which is then taking it from the transformers and poles directly to your house or to your business. So the rates that solar generators were recovering was the full retail rate, which included transmission and distribution cost in it, but they were only generating, they really weren't contributing to the transmission and distribution. So that's really was the crux, in making sure that the rate paid for electricity generated by generation, whether it be solar was a main focus, but it could be wind, it could be biomass, it could be anything. That rate that was paid for the electricity they generate in excess of what they use would be a fair rate so that it isn't transferring costs to the ratepayers who do not generate. That was really the crux of it. So depending on your position on it, it was either called the grid equity bill or it was called the solar tax. Okay, and so, but it was the same piece of legislation. So we did not reach full agreement on the best process for doing that, but all parties believe that they need it, because the most important thing that investors need, businesses need, consumers need is certainty. Could they invest in solar? Would there be a return on investment if they did that? Where do the utility companies stand on that? How do ratepayers come out in those discussions? So over the interim, the utility companies, the solar manufacturers, the solar installers, some of the large groups that use a lot of solar, so the pork producers, for instance, represent a big group of private individuals who have installed solar. Met many, many times, and I stayed close to it all summer long on this project, but to the satisfaction of everyone, they came out with an agreement that would talk about what the rates would be. There are two options for solar generators to be able to use. One is essentially, in easy terms, trading off kilowatt hours. You pay for so many kilowatts that you generate in excess, or you receive kilowatts, or dollars, a meter that runs 2 meters. One that generates how many dollars that you are generating and selling to the grid, and the other for how much you are buying. Because no generator generates exactly what they need to use. So you think about solar, it generates in a hot, sunny day, but it doesn't generate at night, right? So you're using the grid. So same way with wind. Wind generates when the wind blows, but it doesn't generate when the wind doesn't blow. So you have to have that base load there, because you don't want to have your lights work sometimes, or your electricity to work sometimes. You want it to work all the time. So we ended up with an agreement that will those two choices are available. The rates have been agreed to for that. Solar is less than 1% of the electricity generated in the state of Iowa today. When that market share hits 5% or in 2027, then the Iowa Utilities Board will do a value of solar study, determine what is exactly the value that solar generation creates. And they have agreed on all the things that are going to be in the value of solar study. All parties have agreed to that, and they have agreed that whatever the value of solar study shows at the end of that period of time, rates will not change by more than 5% a year to also be able to transition in. So this has given great certainty to the solar installers. It's given certainty to the solar manufacturers. The utility companies know how to plan as well for solar, and if other people want to put in self-generation, exactly how the economics of that will work. There are some interest in large solar farms in the state of Iowa, which will increase the amount of solar generation. Many of you are aware there's one in Wayzata County that's over 300 acres that's looking at being installed. So the fact that we had a kumbaya moment between all of the interested parties, they brought to me a term sheet, everything that they agreed on. Well, you don't pass term sheets, you pass legislation that goes in the code. So I took the term sheet, had it drafted into legislation, made sure they looked at it, made sure every comma was right, every word was right, because I didn't want anybody to say, oh, we're for it, and then whisper in the senator's ear, well, we're not really, right? It was either 100% agreement or no agreement, okay? And that worked. And so the House passed the bill unanimously, sent it to the Senate. It was actually a Senate file. We did a strikeout amendment, so we replaced all the language in the previous bill and substituted this new language. The House passed that, sent it to the Senate, and the Senate concurred with our amendment, and it is being sent down to the governor. And I would anticipate the governor probably sign it next week. I don't know exactly her schedule, but I see no objection to the governor for this. So it's worked.
I'm definitely not going to provide a more comprehensive explanation than that. I will say, however, that I was excited. Obviously, there's a lot of support for renewable energy in our state in lots of different forms, and I'm glad that we've got some consistency going forward. People have a clear understanding of what the rules of the road are going to be, and I think that's exactly what you need when you're trying to get new investment in this kind of energy. I've got some solar installers in my district who are really excited about the compromise, and Representative Kaufman's point is a great illustration of the bipartisan process and trying to get agreement, which isn't always easy. But the good thing about this is that you know that because it was bipartisan, if and when you do see changes in who's controlling the legislature or the governorship, this kind of agreement won't go anywhere because there was. I think this is agreement, and that's a good thing too.
Hello, Jean Clark, Muscatine, Iowa, and my question is about felon voting rights and the amendment to the Iowa Constitution, and somewhat addressing bipartisan working. Governor Reynolds wants felon to have voting rights restored. She asked for it in her first State of the State address, and last legislative session, the Republicans denied that to her. Now you're looking at an amendment that would limit voting rights to felons who have fully paid restitution, and also certain felons would be excluded, those who have killed someone, things like that, sexual abuse cases, things. And so I guess with that in mind, I'm all for restoring voting rights to felons. But I want you to be aware of two statistics. One I heard, I'm pretty sure on public radio, that there are more felons in Iowa that are denied their voting rights than there are registered voters in some of our Iowa counties. That's a pretty huge number. And the other thing is, we know our criminal justice system is racially biased. We can pull up the statistics on that, that people of color get harder sentences, longer sentences. If you question that, think back to 1991 and Eric Branstad, who was in a driving drunk in his father's campaign vehicle and killed 2 people, and he had a $15 traffic violation. You know, that's an example of how skewed our system can be. So my question is, how do you justify limiting voting rights, knowing your restrictions are racially and economically biased?
Gene, I don't say this terribly often. I strongly support Governor Reynolds and her position on this. She, I think, is 100% correct. I don't support this exemption for or this requirement that you have to fully repay your restitution. I think that we're going to wind up in a 2-tiered system where folks who, especially have committed, a white-collar crime, who have a lot of money, in a bank account somewhere, can get their full citizenship rights back. And folks who do not have the same bank account are not going to be able to have their full rights of citizenship restored more quickly. I understand the concerns, the practical concerns. You can be current on a payment plan 1 month and then not be current the next month, but that's just, that's life. So I think that's kind of not a concern. I wish that the Senate had just taken up the bill that the House had sent us last year. The Senate didn't do that. The folks in the Senate had some, I think, more restrictive views about what should be permissible. I thought that was very unfortunate. I would be very curious at the source of that first statistic, that there are counties that have more felons denied their rights than people who are registered to vote. That's
The total number of denied voters, if you say, look at that number, and compare that statewide.
Compared to some
So,
individual counties.
compared to the registered voters in some counties.
I can maybe see that being a little bit more true. And look, I certainly agree with you. There is a lot of bias in our criminal justice system. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure if the example you gave is one that's necessarily reflecting racial bias, not just bias towards powerful areas. But I do think that as we consider what the consequences of our policymaking are here, I certainly agree that the fact that Iowa has, at the moment, one of the 2 or 3 most restrictive voting rights restorations programs in the country is, I think, unacceptable. I'm glad we're moving forward. Again, I would have supported adopting what the House passed, and that's unfortunately that's where we are. We still have a ways to go. What the Senate passes is going to have to move forward back into the House. The House will have to pass it, and then we'll have to pass it again after the 2020 election, and then it'll go to the people to vote after that.
Just a logistical thing. After Gene's question has been answered, we're going to take our 5-minute break, and the people who are standing in line will be recognized in the same order that they are in right now, so you need not stay in the line if you do not wish.
Thanks. So the amendment and the legislation to kind of get the rules for it have been 2 separate issues. I think Bobby, that went through state government, so he really knows more about all the details. The House passed the language last year to put the amendment into the Constitution because the governor felt like it shouldn't move necessarily from one governor to the next governor as to what the state's policy was. Let's get it into the Constitution. And the advantage of constitutional amendments is you don't really have to rely just on 150 legislators and a governor. It's really the will of the people to vote. There's a lot of advantages for doing amendments. So the issue that I think stands is then those rules as to who's going to be eligible, who's not going to be eligible. Voting is certainly a right for citizens who are participating in our democracy. Candidly, some of those criminals and some of those crimes we have judged to be so severe, murder, rape, a number of those, that those people maybe have lost their chance to be able to contribute that way. So there are some exclusions in that. The issue about restitution, it's really about victim restitution is where most of it is, not total restitution. And I think we need to be really careful as legislators to not lose sight of the victims here, where the people who suffered from these crimes before we are so quick to, let's not make this about the criminals, let's not forget about the victims. I think that's where a lot of the discussion is taking place, to make sure victim restitution is repaid before someone has the opportunity to vote, but to have that process become more automatic rather than just the governor approving each one individually.
I worked on that prison program that has to do with rehabilitation, so I've been talking to corrections, I've had lots of meetings, and these type of topics come up. Some of the legislators don't know if giving voter rights back will help rehabilitation. They just don't know. That's a conversation. And actually, like Gary mentioned, I mean, there's just some crimes you just can't go back. They're just so bad that nobody wants to support somebody with that situation. And I would say probably the number one thing, and Gary was right on this, is the victim. That's what I'm hearing, is that it all sounds good, but you're making it seem like that the person that's in prison, that's a victim, but they have a victim of the crime. And so that's a concern that and that's the reason we're kind of trying to work this through.
Well, I'm the floor manager of the bill. So first and foremost, I want to say that I didn't deny the governor anything. I passed the bill 95-2 last year out of the House. I agree with your criminal justice reform comments. The criminal justice system needs reform badly. You look no further than the cocaine laws on powdered versus cracked cocaine, which are predominantly used by different income levels and different races. And the white guy using a certain kind of cocaine is getting a year, and the person of color that's using the different kind of cocaine is getting 10 years. That's wholly unacceptable and something that I'm working on. But to Gary and Mark's point, let's not forget that there are a lot of guilty people in prison. And you said that when they get out, they're being denied their rights to vote. Well, they denied someone's right to not be murdered. They denied someone's right to not be raped. And so that's why I strongly support the exceptions in the Senate bill, and I'm going to pass that in the House, which says if you murder somebody, if you rape someone, if you molest a child, if you're on the sex offender registry, you give up your rights forever. You don't ever get that opportunity back. And as far as restitution is concerned, I can't make the argument in front of the Iowa legislature that I'm going to make someone who committed a heinous crime whole before they make their victim whole. So I support the governor's initiative. She supports what's passed the Senate, and I think that it'll pass the House as quick as this week.
Okay, I'll look forward to talking to you guys later.
Thank you.
And we'll reconvene at 10 minutes to.
Mary Beveridge in Muscatine, speaking on behalf of Terry Eagle, the director of the National Pearl Button Museum, who could not be here today. I'm talking here about the fish hatchery, the Fairport Fish Hatchery, which is closely tied to a large local history, the Pearl Button history. That building is slated to be demolished by the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and Terry would like to know if there is any way to slow or halt the DNR's progress toward demolishing the building without regard to the importance of the history it represents. Present plans are the conservation efforts that are going on at the pump house now, the fish hatchery also called the pump house, mark the beginning of a possible new future for Muscatine. And I appreciate your time. With it, although Roger just pointed out that it is in today's Des Moines Register, front page.
Thanks, Mary. I have to answer you nicely. You probably wouldn't give my wife a ride home after this. But, yeah, I did. I saw the article, and I thought that was timely, since I knew Mary was going to ask something about this today. So, can we slow DNR down? I think we probably can. I put it on my follow-up for next week to call Kayla and talk to her about it. If you have not seen the article on the front page of the Des Moines Register today, I think it gives a nice overview, and the gentleman quoted in the article was fairly positive as well about the opportunity. It's a very old building. It's been flooded many, many times. It is in the floodplain. It will always flood. So getting it to be a usable facility again will be difficult. So it's a little bit about what's the building issue versus also what is, the nurturing of mussels and kind of our history, and is there some linkage can be done through the Pearl Button Museum and the hatchery, whatever. I think it's an interesting opportunity for some matching. I have not talked to the director yet, but I'll do that next week. Right?
I got a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, Chris Kramer came down Coastal Affairs, so she went around Muscatine. So I have talked to her quite a bit about this, and her concern really was that how it had just been flooded over multiple times and just kind of determining whether it could be preserved or not. And so, and Terry has does such a nice job presenting everything too. I mean, it's pretty darn amazing. So we've talked back and forth, and I talked to him because when the people making movies in Iowa and everything, I kind of hooked him up to kind of talk. Maybe that story could be something they could do at some point in time. But I'd be happy to talk to Chris Kramer a little bit more about what her thoughts are, and then the new DNR director as well too.
It's the first time hearing of it, but I will follow Gary's lead. Any input I can give to the DNR, I'd be happy to. But the answer is nothing is inevitable when it comes to stopping the DNR, so that's always an option.
Well, good morning, John David, Muscatine. And I know I wear different hats, but today's hat that I'm wearing is Citizen Diplomacy and Sister Cities. I would like to talk to you about this and to also the audience here. As the president of Muscatine Sister Cities and also as elected officials that serves on Sister City International in Washington, D.C., I would like to say that we in Iowa have many reasons to be proud of and to rejoice too. And even though sometimes we talk about different bills that to some it might be a good thing, to others might not be, we don't want to forget the good things that we are doing as Iowans also here and celebrate that too. So just to share some information with you, Iowa ranked number 9 among the 50 states when it comes to the number of sister cities between Iowa, on different communities in Iowa and the rest of the world. This is to be proud of. Muscatine, on the other hand, we have 9 sister cities in 8 countries, in which we have almost 27% of the number of sister cities in the whole state of Iowa. And this is another thing for us in Muscatine to be happy about and to be rejoiced about. So I would like to thank you for everything you do. Definitely this is a very important movement in Iowa. We are going from left to right, up, down, and we're trying to encourage every community to start a sister city relationship. So with your support, many thanks for everything you do. And also, I will miss if I don't say also, thank you for settling down the K-12 budget as the Vice President of Muscatine County School Board. So thank you also for this, for settling that. And sometimes, up until you get elected into an office, sometimes you think that those people who are elected, their job is very easy. Believe me, what you are doing and what every elected official is doing is very tough job. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Just a quick comment. First of all, I'm happy to be here as your clear favorite Kaufman, just for the record. But I just want to comment that I know a lot about your program through our conversations. I think you do a fantastic job, and anything I can ever do to support the program, I'm behind it 100%.
And one thing I would like to say, I don't intend to respond, but there are a lot of very strong sister city supporters among the audience here. And one of them is Walter, our Vice President, Mickey Hill, Dan Clark, and if I look around, a lot of Muscatine people are very supportive. So thank you.
I was fortunate when I was in the House, I was the chair of International Relations, which was basically between the House and the Senate combined. And I dealt with sister states, sister city, and so I mean it was amazing. We had groups come up there all the time, and I know I dealt with you multiple.
That reminds me with Sarah Landy.
Sarah Landy, oh yeah, yeah.
Too.
Oh yeah, she introduced me to all kinds of people related to that. So they obviously do good work. And with the coronavirus, there's actually a meeting up there with a big group of a lot of the sister city, sister state talking about the concerns worldwide with that issue too.
Hey John, as you know, we've been steady supporters, and I don't see any decrease in support from the legislature on sister cities. It's a good outreach, and Iowans, we rely heavily on international trade and international friendship, so I would anticipate that we'll be steady support.
I would certainly second everything that's been said. I think especially in moments like this that Senator Lofgren just alluded to, as we're starting to become aware of some of the global interdependencies that we especially have when it comes to public health. We do know that several of Iowa's sister cities in China are experiencing some of these outbreaks of coronavirus. We had a briefing on it, I guess a week and a half ago now at the legislature. There's no reason for panic or alarm here in Iowa just yet. I've been doing I think our local papers are doing a great job covering basic things people can do to keep themselves healthy, symptoms of coronavirus, information's out there, and make sure that you're looking at good verified news, not just sharing stuff on Facebook or Twitter. Make sure it's real, it's verified, and please don't spread rumors. Our sister cities are dealing with this, especially in China, where this really all began. So thank you for everything that you do, John, and let's make sure that we continue to do everything that we can to think globally and act globally.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Peg Gordon, Muscatine, Iowa. I'm here as a animal rights discussion. I am a licensed pet service provider in Muscatine, so I adhere to all the rules of the Department of Agriculture and support them. But I'm here, two topics. One is House Bill HF 737, which the Senate acted upon this week. First of all, let me thank the House for voting unanimously last year to pass it. I have concerns with the Senate's dilution of the House bill this week. For anybody that's not following it, it's changing the penalties for aggravated animal cruelty from an aggravated misdemeanor to a felony. I sort of was glad to be behind John. John gave you positive news. We're in like number 9 of all the states that are sister cities. We are also number 2 in states. I mean, we're number 48 actually. We're in the 2 worst states when it comes to penalties for animal cruelty. We don't adhere to the felony charge. and that's what the bill was, to move it from aggravated misdemeanor to a felony. And we voted it and diluted that bill this week. Mississippi's there with us, and they're on track to probably vote it up to a felony. So Iowa, Mississippi, not two states you usually have in the same range. Just as a recent issue that came up in Decorah in 2019, to give you an idea about penalty inequalities, which we've heard a couple times today. A gentleman stole 2 iPhones. Later on, he killed 2 dogs with a hatchet. One was a felony, one was a misdemeanor. The felony was the iPhone stealing. And yet when he turned around and killed 2 dogs, it was a misdemeanor. And that was in July, last summer of 2019. On the other side, there's also studies that show that domestic or abuse, animal abuse, can lead to domestic violence. So there's lots of studies and information there. My question about HF 737 is, what was the reason to dilute it when the House had passed it unanimously last year? And I do have a second question on another bill that's outstanding. You don't have to expand as much on this one, but I am asking you to oppose it, and that's SSB 3180, which is removing the ability for cities and counties to stand against puppy mills. As we know, Iowa's in the top 4 when it comes to puppy mill abuses. And I'm not going to stand here and show you pictures. But if you want to expand on that a little, that'd be great. We're going to keep pushing to oppose that bill. But thank you for whatever response you can give me.
Sure. So, Peg, I strongly supported the House file. Maybe I'm in the wrong chamber. I don't know. I support a lot of the bills that are coming over to the Senate from the House. But unfortunately, one of the things that I learned, am learning as a freshman legislator, is there are a lot of different places where a good idea can get derailed. And there's a lot of power that's concentrated in a single person in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader basically has unilateral authority to decide whether or not to bring a bill to the floor. And it kind of doesn't matter if the bill passed the House 100-0 or 51-49. The Senate Majority Leader can do what he or she wants. And in our case, there was a vocal minority within the Senate Republican caucus that was insisting that the bill not come to the floor unless there were changes made to it. So in terms of, and I don't believe Senator Lofgren was in that minority. I think that he likes puppies just as much as the rest of us. Cocker Spaniel, so, you know. But that's kind of the way that the sausage gets made internally, is that when you've got a kind of vocal minority within even the majority party, they can kind of extract demands and concessions out of the Senate Majority Leader, who again has the sole authority to determine whether or not the bill gets voted on the floor. You don't learn that in Schoolhouse Rock, but that is how a lot of those compromises and concessions get made. I was not there to vote on this bill. I would have voted against the amendment. I would have voted for the full bill. But I do think it's probably better to have a step forward than to have no vote at all, which I think is probably the alternative in this case.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy, and congratulations, by the way, on being elected as a city council member.
Thanks,
so
Gary.
You too will get some learning experiences. Okay. I'm going to defer it to Bobby primarily because I voted for the bill last year in the House, and candidly, I'm not sure what all the changes that the Senate made in the SSB 3180. I think that's a Senate study bill. Believe me, I'm not worried about Senate study bills at this point in the session because that probably indicates it's not going anywhere. You never know. But this late in the session, a study bill, it's hard for it to get traction. But I haven't seen that bill, Peggy. I'm still in House study bills and House files. But I'll defer to Bobby. I thought we had good legislation last year. It passed successfully in the House. Bobby ran a lot of that.
11 years ago, our dog passed away. I was up in Decorah with my kids, and we were driving by, and there's little Cocker Spaniels, and I thought, we'll stop. I thought, why did I do that? So it was like on a Friday, and so it ended up, we said, okay, you hold this until Sunday when we're going back to Muscatine, and so the dog's name's Cora from Decorah. So no, we do like pets, and we, everything. But I would have voted for that bill exactly like it was. But I tell you what, with our caucus, there's a lot of ag people that just didn't want it going that direction. So it is a little bit frustrating. But I will say a lot of the key support. Tracy, I think her last name for the Quad City is really involved with this. She's really happy that it did pass. So a lot of people are very happy. And I was getting a little bit skeptical because some of the people were really acting like maybe it was not going to happen. So I'm pleased that it did. But I know Bobby, he's on judiciary, and I know he's going to talk a little bit about how this really works with this little change from our bill too.
All right, I'm going to go into Gary Solar mode. So this will be my longest answer of the day. I'll keep it as brief as I can, but I want to actually make the case to you that the amended version is stronger and better coming from the person who's passed every single animal law that's passed in the last 6 years. You might remember 6 years ago, 5 years ago, you couldn't add your pet in a restraining order, and that was causing a lot of abused individuals to stay in the home because the abuser would say, if you leave, I'm going to beat the crap out of the dog.
Right.
If you leave, I'm going to shoot him. And so if you had abused people staying in the home, and we successfully passed that, so that's law now that you can add a pet to your protective order. Another bill, and I'm getting to answer your question, but I just want to give the crowd context. Another bill we passed unanimously up the House floor last week is in regards to veterinarians. If they suspect animal abuse, they're currently legally prohibited from reporting it. So even though someone's bringing in a dog they've clearly beat the hell out of, they actually cannot report it to law enforcement because it violates patient confidentiality. That's passed unanimously on the House side. I'm hoping the Senate passes it, and that would make vets a permissible reporter of abuse. As far as Senate study bill, that's a really, really bad bill that I can guarantee you. I don't think it's going to go anywhere in the Senate, but if it ever did, it will die a very quick death in the House. As far as 737, that's the animal abuse torture bill. I was the original author of the language, and the frustrating thing for me is that there are still, to this moment, good protections on the book that aren't being enforced. So I represent the person in Iowa City. Well, I wish I didn't represent him. I probably shouldn't use that word on live TV. Anyway, who drug a cat out of his roommate's corner of the house and continued to beat it. And as the kitten got away, he drug it out from underneath the bed until its eye sockets popped out. He got probation. But what people don't understand is that he could have received 2 years in prison for that. So you see all these cases where people are able to go to jail for up to 2 years and they're getting pled down to nothing, to slaps on the wrist. So why I support, although I would have preferred 737 as is, why I support the changes, and I'm going to pass it unanimously this week, is it requires mandatory jail time. Year in jail minimum, guaranteed. So because of this bill, even if we had the felony, I was always concerned that judges would still plead them down to slaps on the wrist. These people, these monsters, who are probably going to grow up to hurt kids and humans, are now guaranteed to have to go to prison.
And thanks for clarifying that, because I mean, I've read, is it like 70% of 2 years is what the penalty will be? I mean, and that's a great start. We still need to, I think, move forward and try to meet the federal rules and meet up with the other cities. But that is a good start. We just need to adhere to it and penalize them properly.
I will not stop until we get there.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate the answer. So, thanks, guys.
Hello, thanks for all your service, and my name is Sarah Landy, and I'm here to get an update on the funding of the 3/8 sales tax, penny sales tax for the IWell and the conservation measures. I understand it's in flux, but I hope you can support whenever you can, and I'd like to be updated on the status of it. Thank you for your service.
Absolutely, Sarah. So since the last time you were here, I will tell you that there has been, I don't know if I can call it significant, but there has been substantial progress. As far as my personal vote, I've told my Ways and Means Chair, Representative Hine, that I'm a yes. And so if I get the opportunity to vote for it, you can count on my vote. The governor's going around the state. It's making an impact on people. She's holding these town halls. They're full of people that are support, some that are opposed, of course. But it's making an impact on people. I still doubt whether it can get done in 1 year. This might be a 2-year process. But progress since last time we talked, and I am a yes in the Ways and Means Committee.
You didn't mention REAP, but I do know we want to get that extended because that expires. Yeah. So actually on Tuesday afternoon, I'm supposed to meet with the governor to talk on what the bill of mine called land banks, and then they also want to discuss that with me. So we'll see how that goes.
So I told Sarah it was in flux because the whole issue of the Invest in Iowa Tax Act for the governor, and I agree with Bobby, she's trying to drum up support, and I would encourage people to contact all our legislators. Now, yeah, obviously with us, but many of you have outreach to other legislators that you know or groups that you know to encourage that. I am supportive of her legislation. She knows that. Our Ways and Means Chair knows that. I share an office with the Ways and Means Chair, so he hears it from me more often than he perhaps wants to hear it from. But it will be done in the overall discussion of tax legislation and the budget this year. This is one of the alternatives. Now, I would say it's made more progress this year than it has in the previous 5 years that I've served in the legislature. And so I am hopeful that it is picking up additional momentum. I talked to a legislator this week who had a forum last week and also attended a meeting where the governor was in his community. And he thought it would be so-so reaction and came back and told me that everybody at the forum and everybody at the session, including people that he usually doesn't agree with on issues, were really supportive of this, and he admitted to me that he is completely rethinking his support of this issue. So these things do work. Now, the percentages, there are some people that are concerned about percentages changed in the formula. I think the percentage changes reflect changes in where we are today and where the priorities are, but even when the percentages have gone down. So REAP, for instance, went down to 10%, but if it passed under the governor's proposal, that would increase still the dollars into REAP from $12 million a year to $17 million a year. So even though the percentages went down, you have to still look at what are the dollars that are going into those areas. It still would be significant. And in some areas like lake and storm restoration, which is a major part also of water quality issues, would go from around $10 million to $17 million. So that's a lot more projects to move forward in regard to water quality. And it go, I mean, obviously the biggest is the change into some watershed and soil conservation, but even the ones that had a decrease in the percentage is still a significant increase in dollars. And I think that's an important quality of life component. There are certainly people concerned about a sales tax increase and how that impacts some people, and other people are saying, you know, we just need to increase the sales tax, we need to get the funding into this priority. So I'm hoping that it is getting momentum and that we'll see it by the end of this session.
So the proposal had a Senate subcommittee this week, and the Republican chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Jake Chapman, claimed that the bill was dead and not moving out of his committee. What that tells me is that there will probably be some deal that gets hammered out that is not based on the governor's proposal. It will be different from the current form it's in. So I think at this point it's probably hard to speculate what the bill will look like coming out of the Senate. I've got a couple of concerns about the governor's proposal that I have not been hesitant to share, including I think when we talked about this last month. You know, I voted for I Will. It was the very first thing I ever voted for back in 2010. I flipped the ballot, filled it in, then went back and voted for everybody else. And it was something that I was really excited about. I am, however, concerned about the proposal the governor's put forward, because it's not just a clean 3/8 cent sales tax increase with the money going to what the voters approved in 2010. There are a whole bunch of changes involved, including changes to some of the mental health funding, changes to income tax cuts that are going to disproportionately benefit wealthy folks, things that are going to put new, so we passed some tax cut bills in the last couple of years, and attached to some of those tax cut bills were these things called triggers, where essentially the taxes would be cut more if some of these triggers were met, and so they were triggered. This legislation that the governor's put forward would remove some of those triggers, so those new tax cuts would take effect automatically. So it's not, unfortunately, just a simple question of, do we want to approve what the voters, you know, voted for in 2010, yes or no? If it was that question, I would be a strong, solid yes. That's not where we are. It's a much more complicated, kind of Rube Goldberg package of a lot of stuff that's been put together to try and get to the 51 votes needed in the House and 26 votes needed in the Senate. But because the current proposal has, basically the Senate Republicans have said it's not moving forward as is. But to me, that means that they're probably going to try to make the overall bill move it in a direction that I will likely not support. But again, until we see the final proposal and we're voting on it, it's hard to say for sure. The one thing I will say I'm a little worried about is that last year we had some more changes to property tax legislation that were dropped on us. And we had, at least in the Senate, probably 36 hours that it was available publicly before we voted on it. Not even. These are big bills. So, reading them and getting a clear understanding is tough sometimes. So we'll see how it all shakes out when we're voting on it.
We are in a rare situation today. This is our last new questioner. And so after the good lady here is done, if we have time, we will take people for the second time or follow-up questions. But you're on.
Hello, I'm affiliated with the Student Senate here at MCC, and right now our main initiative is working to raise awareness on food insecurity that students are experiencing when attending college, and also we're working to find solutions to food insecurity here on campus. In regards to accessibility of food, especially nutritious food, there's an example of this here in Muscatine with the lack of grocery stores available in the south end of town, specifically the area south of the soccer complex, which holds a very large population of Muscatine. Currently, there is a Dollar General in that area, another convenience store, and 2 working gas stations. This is a prime example of what is happening across Iowa. Is there anything that the legislators are currently working on to tackle this issue?
Can you say your name one more time, please?
Sarai.
Sarai.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. Food insecurity is a big issue. I think that there's a misconception that some people have that all college students are, just kind of like going to class and they're just doing totally fine and they're more worried about partying or whatever. And obviously that's not true for everybody at all. And I think that food insecurity is one of those things that a lot of legislators don't actually realize is a problem for a lot of college students. I think that because the costs of higher education have exploded so much over the last 20, 30 years, there's just a real disconnect between what a lot of legislators think the realities are like and what they actually are like. So to my knowledge, I don't know if there's any legislation that's currently being put forward. I do know that there has been, and I've been working on this in the Ag Committee, some new energy that's going in towards trying to support getting more farm fresh produce into our schools. And that's mostly looking at K-12 schools, not necessarily looking at community colleges. But I would be very interested in trying to see what we can do to support new dollars going to support local producers and growers getting their vegetables, getting some of their fresh livestock into our community colleges as well, making sure that you've got access to food on campus at the very least. This is something that is also one of those deals where if you don't make that investment in healthy food in the front end, you're going to wind up paying for it on the back end later with a more expensive health system. And so this is really kind of all connected. So I thank you for bringing the question forward. We're going to keep working in the Ag Committee to try and make sure that we've got that local farm produce fund going, and I'd love to see it expanded to include our community colleges and universities as well.
I'm not aware of any particular legislation this year on that. Hy-Vee here in town sells during the season a lot of locally grown produce. From the Muscatine Island standpoint, we've had produce stands for years and years. So I'm not really aware of that. The issue about grocery stores on the south end, that's not really a legislative issue. That's really a market-driven situation. And because of the mobility that people have today, with either through, in Muscatine's case, public transportation or through their own vehicles.
I visit a lot with Mike Miller, not the one from Muscatine, but the Quad Cities. The food bank up there, Peg over here probably can talk to you more about it. So thanks.
A lot of the local foods producers are looking for new markets, and I've been trying to pass several pieces of legislation over the years that will help allow them to promote their products better. I don't know that any of those bills are alive this year, but it's something I continue to work on. And to allude to Senator Lofgren's point, there is a food bank tax exemption bill
that I think would go a long ways towards your issue. I'm not sure where the chairman is on it, but it's something I support, and if I have an opportunity to vote for it, we'll definitely do so. Great question.
Dean, since we opened the door to you, I just want to let everybody know that once you're done, we're slamming the door shut. So she will be the last question, and then the legislators will give us something.
It's a quick question, and Muscatine just lost their OBGYN facilities at the hospital and a lot of rural community hospitals. I was talking to my brother who just retired from the health clinic in Mount Pleasant. They don't have OBGYN services there anymore. And I know he was talking to me about legislation that was in front of the Iowa legislators about limiting the ability, the jury awarded amounts on lawsuits, and I'm kind of nebulous on this, but I would like to know where you stand on that legislation on, do you know what I'm talking about? I don't know if it's...
So are you for the caps on the medical mal bill?
I am.
Oh, I never would have expected that, because I am
Why
too.
not? I mean...
Traditionally, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, I know.
I was going to say, I'm not partisan, and it's logical, because if we don't have caps, we have really large lawsuits, and then you can't have insurance for your medical personnel, and these little rural communities lose their medical people, and then what are women who don't have easy access to transportation going to do? Where are they going to go for prenatal care? You know, we don't have Planned Parenthoods around here that can provide them. Anyway, so, yes, I'm for caps.
I'm 100% on board. The reason I was just pleasantly surprised is I've probably received 50 emails on this, 25 for, 25 against. 100% of the people that have asked me to oppose it are registered Democrats. 100 people that have asked me to be for it are registered Republicans. It just surprised me as all. But I'm all for it. Every state around us, with one exception, has caps. So that's a good Republican issue for you.
Yeah, that got out of the Senate, and I voted for it. There's a couple things. In my newsletter, you might have saw that the Community Health Center, Todd Bowman's the director, and they're doing some different health services down in Muscatine, obviously. And then in the Economic Development Authority meeting that University of Iowa put on, there's a small little company that I was involved with called Apollo, and what they do is they kind of manage, like if there's doctors and people that work in different hospitals, if they have extra time, what they'll do is they'll kind of manage that with an app, and they can go work at another facility. And so that's something I've kind of been spreading around. I thought it's very interesting, and I relayed that to the Rural Iowa Task Force, saying, hey, we should at least look into that to see if that might help rural Iowa a little bit too. So, and I know John Becky in town here cares deeply about this. We've been having some conversations too. So it's concerning. I have grandkids. I know it's concerning. I mean, geez, my daughter comes back, oh, geez, I can't get anywhere for my granddaughter. So.
How do you recruit industry to a community that doesn't have OBGYN services?
Yeah, the medical malpractice bill was assigned to me this week, so I know a lot more about it than maybe I even want to know about it. And I am in the process of listening to both sides of the argument. So the one is what the Senate passed is that on non-economic damages. So it's important to understand how lawsuits are. There are economic damages and non-economic damages. So an economic damage is, let's say that there was a medical procedure and somebody died, and it was determined that had a process been done differently, the person wouldn't have died. Well, there are some economic formulas that you go through that says this person was this age, this is what their career earnings, this is what they would have earned, this is what they're going to lose out on earnings, this was the benefits they would have had, that type of thing. And so what is the economic outcome of that to help to determine if it is found that the case that there was malpractice, then what should the person be reimbursed for? And economics is then part of that decision. The other bucket, which is non-economic damages, are far more difficult to determine a concrete formula. What is pain and suffering? What is loss of consortium? Those types of things. Where this cap is on the non-economic side of the equation. Iowa does not has a cap, but it's really a soft cap today, and there's a lot of language that allows it to go by, and so there have been some large settlements recently about that. Some people who, so I'm trying to be neutral right now while I'm going through this. So you have people, I've heard from a lot of medical professionals, insurance groups, hospital groups, whatever, that would like that a cap. Again, it brings back to certainty as to you know what you're insuring for in the unfortunate case when a suit like this takes place and it's found to have merit. Others will say that how do you put dollars on a life for those most egregious situations? Now, they're not always because of a loss of life. It can also be a surgery that's gone wrong for some other reason that's caused a person, they're not going to recuperate completely as they were anticipating to recover. You know, should there be a cap on that or should there not be a cap? Some people who would argue and say, listen, that's why we have a jury. That's why we have a judge, and we allow the attorney representing that person to make their claim as to what they think it should be, and we should allow the jury. Candidly, I don't know for sure where I'm going. I don't know what I did wrong to the speaker when he gave me this bill, but this one will be a difficult one to navigate to get good language. You know, Senator Walz says the House has to send back good legislation lots of times, so I'm not sure I can thread the needle on this one, but we will be having a lot of discussions over the next couple of weeks on that bill.
Representative Carlson, it's not always good legislation, but it is, I think, a lot of the time. Gene, so I voted against the caps. I was not convinced that the specific challenges that we're seeing around closing L&D and OBGYN units is specifically related to these non-economic damages pieces. We were looking at data that showed that you're seeing these rises in insurance premiums that are dramatically outpacing what are actually being paid out of settlements and reward. So, at least from our vantage point, the issue is not the lawsuits per se, specifically because every single verdict is subject to the fact that a judge can step in and say, if this is unreasonable, the judge can step in and say, you got to either adjust it down or go back to trial. And then we also didn't feel like there was a clear link between what we were seeing. I will say Senate Democrats, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of this, introduced legislation called the Healthy Moms and Babies Act that would have tried to tackle this crisis that we're seeing in maternal mortality head on. For those of you who don't know, we've actually seen a doubling of maternal mortality in the state of Iowa over the last 5 years. It's information according to the CDC. 67 of Iowa's 99 counties do not have a healthcare option with OBGYN prenatal L&D care, so it's a big number. Marshalltown, which is not a small community, recently lost its L&D unit. So this is a problem that we're seeing across the state. Democrats introduced legislation that would have increased the Medicare reimbursement rates, expanded some of these services, tried to standardize some of the care that moms see when they're expecting, moms-to-be would see when they're expecting. And so we agree this is a big problem. And if this helps, even if I didn't vote for it, I'll be rooting for its success to try and address this issue. I'm just not sure that I totally buy into this explanation that that's what it'll be driving the issue forward. It seems like a larger part of the challenge is that there are just a lot of these facilities that are really struggling, especially with some of these reimbursement rates. So I know it's a tough issue, but I think everybody should agree this is a critically important issue, because if we don't have healthy moms and babies, the future of our state is going to be in a lot of trouble. So I think that's where we are at the moment. I appreciate you bringing it forward with what happens in the House, and we'll go from there. And I see Walter is mentioning for the microphone, so I'll hand it over to him.
There is one cap that I think even Senator Walz might be tempted to support, and that's the cap on time we devote to the legislative forum every month, and that cap now has been reached. So we will be meeting again for one more meeting first Saturday of next month,
And I want to thank the legislators and also those who came out. We try to keep things civil in Muscatine County, and I think so far we're doing pretty well.